We've got Gillian Martin here to tell us all about why it's important that Aberdeen also is involved with the independence movement. So why is it important to have events like this up here?
It's really important because I'm convinced that if we can win the North East, we've won independence. Okay, there's some sticky areas in Scotland. Sticky areas where around about 60% of people in the last referendum voted against independence. But at the same time, we did make massive inroads. If you think, the result that we had last time of getting around 40%, 42% of people actually voting for independence in the North East was a significant change to what it could have been. We've always had sort of like quite traditionally strong SNP vote in Aberdeenshire. It's been pretty good. But when it comes to the cracking the nut of independence, it's been that people have been voting SNP because of competent, safe government, good local representatives. And when it came to independence, people have been a bit shy of it. It's been quite an uphill battle. But we got there to a point of like 40%. Not as good as the rest of the country, and certainly not as good as where we needed to be. There are certain issues I feel that we need to be speaking to people in the North East particularly about the decisions, the opportunity to make particular decisions around things like immigration. Really important for this area. It's not an area that traditionally attracts a lot of people coming from other countries to help us with our public services, for example. So we have issues around things like vacancies in public sector jobs, vacancies in teaching, nursing, whatever. We need to have an immigration strategy that means that people are coming to the North East, living, staying here, paying tax, filling all those really important jobs that we need filled. And I think that that's a real key area in which we could be talking to people in the North East. Because we're getting taken out from the European Union against our will, we know that that's going to be a particularly damaging thing for the North East economy. So a lot of people believed the nonsense that was given last time, that a vote for independence was a vote to come out of the EU because we wouldn't be allowed in. A lot of people bought that. Things have changed. They've turned right over 180 degrees. So those people who were fear of the implications for the local economy of coming out of the EU are now people we need to be speaking to anew and thinking, right, well, Scotland has to make its own decision about what our relationship is with the EU. And if we've got a hard Brexit, I imagine that that's not what the majority of people in the North East. So we need to go back out and speak to those people.
And so what do you think we can do differently this time in terms of convincing people in the North East that independence might well be the way to go?
We need to be talking locally. We need to be speaking to people. We need to be listening a lot more to people about what their issues are. Not just, I think last time it's easy to be critical. I don't like to be negative about things, but there were a lot of messages. It was like one size fits all. So, for example, these newspapers that we spent so much time delivering that were coming from the Yes campaign, from Glasgow. A lot of those messages, I remember reading some of those newspapers and thinking, I can't put that out in my area, that won't go down well in my area. It was almost like prescribing what an independent Scotland would be, which is what a lot of people particularly wouldn't vote for. The kind of it was a bit policy driven, as opposed to making our own decisions, not telling people what those decisions would be, because those decisions will be warmly received in some areas, but not warmly received in other areas that have got a different political view on things. It was about, we need to be talking about the opportunities of what it could mean to the North East. So a real local campaign with local decision makers on the messaging around, and even hyper-local stuff. One of the things that I think is really important, and one of the things that did work, looking also at what did work in 2014, was very heavily involved with Women for Independence. I was one of the founder members, speaking to women about what their issues were, what they thought an independent Scotland might mean for them, particularly around caring responsibilities and the money around that, and the decisions that a new government could make to do things differently which would benefit them. Hugely powerful, hugely powerful. So you take them as, working mums as one demographic. We need to be having, discussions with them. We need to be having targeted discussions with farmers about what it might mean for them. We need to be having targeted discussions with people from Eastern Europe who decided to live and settle in Scotland about what it might mean for them. We need to be having the right people from those communities speaking to those communities and having a conversation rather than single messages. One size does not fit all, and that was proven in the results that you see across Scotland last time.
And how important is it to separate independence from party politics?
It's extremely important. It's also very powerful. So one of the, I go on about Women for Independence because it was the first real kind of big political with a capital P campaign that I was involved in. One of the things about that is that when you had those people saying, the SNP would say that, you say, no, I'm actually speaking on behalf of Women for Independence. We are all party, cross-party and no party. We are talking about what this chance, this opportunity could mean for women of Scotland, of independence. Not what voting SNP is going to mean with all their policies, not what voting Lib Dem is going to mean for all their policies. It's about the opportunity that there could be for doing things differently as an independent. And I think that's, you have to separate that, because then we start getting into party manifestos, and I think that's what our opposition would like us to do. And we have to be separating the independence vote away from a general election and say, right, okay, what we're voting for is the chance to have a say in X, Y and Z, which we don't have a say in at the moment in Scotland because it's reserved down to Westminster. And looking at what we could do if we did have a say on X, Y and Z, and what opportunities there could be for changing the dynamics in Scotland economically, socially, whatever. If we start getting bogged down in parties, you have to say, well, hang on a second. Once we're independent, those parties will still exist. But you can vote for whatever party you want to run an independent Scotland. Each party, whoever's in power, will have all the levers that we didn't have beforehand to make all the decisions and all the policy decisions. Let's not get bogged down on what those policy decisions are, because that's for the parties to decide post-independence.
And in terms of today, is there anything you're particularly looking forward to this afternoon?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, I'm doing a session on how to win the North East, a strategy discussion panel in about 10 minutes. I'm really looking forward to chewing over what positive things we could be doing now. We do not need to wait for a date. What can we be doing now to prepare the ground for a really effective campaign? Really look forward to that.
Thank you very much for joining us. I have Maggie Chapman now from the Green Party with us. Thanks for joining us.
No problem, thank you.
And so first of all, then, you've just been involved in a workshop about keeping things local in terms of campaigning and that kind of thing. How important do you think this is?
I think campaigning where people are, in the communities that they know, with people with whom they already have relationships, people who trust them, that's vital. That's what grassroots activism is all about. And we know from 2014 that it's actually going to be those local conversations, those peer-to-peer conversations that are going to be able to change enough people's minds for the next referendum to make it the one that wins for us. So local campaigning is fundamental to a grassroots participatory democracy, and that's something that I'm very passionate about. And I know it's something that will give that little bit of extra support for the independence movement.
I think that was definitely true. You saw everyone talking to each other and talking to their friends and their family during the last referendum campaign. But what lessons do you think we could maybe learn from last time, so there might be things done differently?
I think from 2014 and in the intervening few years, I think it's very easy to engage with people in quite aggressive and quite argumentative ways, because if people say things that we know to be wrong, we want to correct them. But really, the way we convince, the way we persuade people is by treating them with respect, by being kind to them, not trying to manipulate or coerce them in any way. And those kinds of conversations that we need to be having happen best between people who already trust and respect each other. So it's making everybody who supports independence go out and be activists on behalf of the movement, not having to rely on political parties, not having to rely on big Scottish-wide institutions, but to see each and every single one of us as activists and organisers in the local communities where we are, because that's how we're going to overcome some of the barriers that we saw last time, the lack of media attention, the lack of ability to present alternative information to people who had always believed a certain thing because that's what they'd been told by the mainstream media. So it's those kinds of conversations we need to be focusing on, those one-to-one conversations that build trust, that build empowerment, and that allow people to come to their own decisions.
And in terms of localism as well, is it important to kind of look at the different areas and the specific kind of issues there in terms of here in the northeast, it's going to be very different than maybe in the borders or in the central belt and that kind of thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. Exactly as you say, there's no point in trying to have one campaign fit every community in Scotland. That's just not going to work. People living, working, learning and playing where they are, they know what's going to work in their local areas. And so those are the people we as a campaign movement and campaign or organisers should trust. They know the kinds of conversations they need to be having. They know what matters to the people where they are. So as you say, what works in Aberdeen is not necessarily going to be the thing that works in Dumfries. And we need to understand that, we need to respect that, and we need to support that as a movement.
So is it all kind of down to empowering people to kind of make changes happen? Exactly.
Empowering people, making sure people have the resources and the information they need, giving people the confidence to start those conversations that they need to be having, and from there building out from their own communities in a really grassroots activism way.
Moving away from independence then, so there was recently the Scottish budget, yes, where the Greens had their workplace parking put in. Yep. So why was that something that was very important to them?
Well, I think on lots of different levels. Our financial system, the way taxation systems work in the UK is broken. It doesn't deliver the kinds of resources we need for the public services we know we want. For our health service, for social care, and so many other services. So, and one of the aspects of just how it's so broken is it's so centralised. Local areas have very little, if any, ability to raise the money they know they need locally. They rely on lobbying and campaigning to central areas, whether that's national government or even local authorities, to say, in this little bit, we need this to work and we need money to support that. And then it comes up to a competition by national and centralised people to make those decisions. What we in the Greens are wanting to see is a shift, so there is much more money available for local people to decide how to spend, and you start that by having local taxation systems. So with the parking, excuse me, the car park levy, it's an opportunity for local areas to decide, is this something they want to take on, and if so, how are they going to do that, and then how are they then going to use that money in ways that they know will fit their needs best. So it's about bringing decision-making and power down to the local level.
And we're here at the convention today, so is there anything that's particularly piqued your interest or anything you're looking forward to?
There have been some fantastic conversations happening around part of the formal conversations in the panel discussions and workshops, but one of the things that I think is so valuable about these kinds of events is it brings people together and it gives people the motivation to go out and do something different. So to be campaigners tomorrow morning, to go out and do something different in a way that maybe they hadn't thought of before. And I think that's the real value of these kinds of events, giving people ideas, giving them different skills, different techniques and tips of how to be campaigners, how to be activists, and how we can actually come together as a mass movement and win this thing.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I've got with me now Depute Leader of the SNP, Keith Brown. Thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
So we're here today in Aberdeen for a conference. How important are these local conferences in terms of getting campaigns up and running?
Really important. It's always important to allow people to have their say and to contribute towards a debate they feel very strongly about. And I think within the SNP we've done that with our national assemblies, but it's great to see the wider independence movement also giving people an opportunity to come together and also lay out their vision, debate their vision for an independent Scotland.
And how important is it to kind of separate independence from party politics?
Well, it's got to be the case that more people that are involved in the political parties have to get involved in independence if we are to achieve independence. So that broad-based appeal, that inclusive nature of the debate and those being involved in it is extremely important.
And we're in Aberdeen today, so how important is it to kind of involve different areas of Scotland in this?
Well, it is very important because obviously there's just a question of logistics. People having to travel to different parts of Scotland can be quite difficult for some people. So to encourage as many people as possible to contribute, having local events like this in the North East, I think is very important.
And is it important to realise that across Scotland different things won't work for different communities? That something that might work here won't necessarily work elsewhere in Scotland?
That's true of campaigning, I think, for political parties, and it's also true of the wider campaigns like independence. You really have to have your campaign rooted in what's important to the local community. So, for example, in Aberdeen and the surrounding area, energy will be much more important than perhaps it might be in different parts of the country. Fishing, of course, has got a particular resonance in this part of the country. Rural issues also. So, yes, I think it's very important that we take into account the differences across Scotland.
And in terms of the wider political picture, we've heard today that there's not going to be any meaningful vote in the UK Parliament for at least another couple of weeks. How do you think Brexit will affect the case for independence?
Well, what we're finding just now, we're out campaigning quite regularly on independence, is that people are just completely scunnered with Brexit, and they're now seeing things like the Honda announcement, the Nissan announcement, or the Dutch government saying they've had 250 companies from the UK looking to relocate to Holland. These things are playing on people's minds. People are anxious. Thus far, we've managed through the work of the Scottish Government to keep employment high, unemployment low. But people are worried about this. They've seen the value of the pound devalue. They've heard about the stories about the lack of preparation from the UK Government. They've heard about possibly the need for stockpiling food and issues in terms of medicine. So people are very anxious. And given that, the solid, steady performance of the Scottish Government, plus the case for independence, I think, has given people the incentive to think very deeply about that.
And as it gets closer and closer to Brexit Day, do you think people are starting to kind of worry a bit more about what that might mean for them?
I think there's no question that that's the case, and it's not just the public, but sectoral interests like the CBI, the Chambers of Commerce came out very strongly. How are they expected to be able to plan for this when within 17 days of the actual Brexit day we won't have a position from the UK government? So many companies, for example, are having to spend tens of millions of pounds on preparations which may not be necessary, but that's what they have to do. So I think it's the case, again, seeing growing anger and impatience from people with the absolute dissolution, if you like, in Westminster between the two big parties, and in particular the government, where it's all over the place. Government ministers taking out an article in the Daily Mail attacking their own government. I mean, this is farcical stuff, and people are crying out for much more steady and considered government, and they can get that here in Scotland.
And how important are events like this in kind of rebooting the campaign for independence?
I think the strength of the campaign last time in 2014 was its broad-based and grassroots nature, and it flourished. And with that, many of those arms of that movement have stayed in place, and it's very important they continually look at the issues which are important to them, work out as well how to broaden their appeal. We have to go beyond 45 to get over 50%, and the only way to do that is to re-examine the offer that you're making. So I think events like this, where people get the chance to sit down and talk these things through, in particular involving young people, I think they're extremely important.
And what do you think are the key lessons that could be learned from 2014 in terms of the potential of going forward to another campaign?
I think some of the things that we did right, it's very important that we stick with that. So making it inclusive, giving the right message to EU nationals, to young people. I think we have to provide more assurance to pensioners. I mean, on the one hand, you could say, why would you want to defend one of the worst pensions in the developed world, which is what we have here in the UK? But I think some of the scare stories last time about pensions, we have to be better at rebutting that and putting forward our own positive case for what a decent deal for pensioners might look at, like in an independent Scotland. So there's a number of issues where we have to provide more reassurance, but at the same time we must ensure that we keep that broad-based, inclusive campaign together.
It seems like it's very important to involve different kinds of communities.
That's right, so you really have to have a message for every part of Scotland, both geographically and in terms of sectoral interests. People will look for that kind of information to find out what it would mean for them. I think equally important is trying to enliven, if you like, engender the enthusiasm for what independence could mean for Scotland. Local decision making, proper decision making, you know, a steady government, for example, which we're not seeing in Westminster, and also not a wasteful government that's squandering money all over the place. For example, like the seaborne freight fiasco, £14 million to a company that had no ships. So I think it's very important that you talk to the different parts of Scotland, whether geographically or sectorally, and tell them what the offer is, the potential is for independence.
And what do you think should be done differently this time from the last campaign?
I think we have to work very hard. I mean, I think the thing last time was it built towards a crescendo. We saw more and more people getting involved. I think we've got to start from a bigger base this time. We start from a healthier base in terms of support for independence, nudging around 50%. But we have to get lots of people involved from the very start, whereas last time it sort of started narrow and became wider. I think we have to make sure that we do that and continue to get a message across. And we have to do it in a respectful way that recognises that some people who voted no last time had their reasons for doing that and try and address them. Not by saying you were wrong and this is why you were wrong, but by saying, how do you think, what are the things you need to know about independence that can move you from your previous position to one of supporting independence?
And I think one of the main questions that people here are going to want answered is there any date in mind for any referendum?
Well, I think because of what we're seeing with Brexit, I think Nicola Sturgeon was absolutely right to say that we have to know what the deal on Brexit is before we can put before the people of Scotland the next steps towards independence. I think that's just common sense because there's so much uncertainty. It seems absurd that we're almost into March and we're still talking about the fact we don't know what the deal is, but we don't. Nicola Sturgeon has said that right from the very start, and I think that's absolutely right. People are, as you've already mentioned, preoccupied, anxious about Brexit. We have to let them see what the prospects is for Brexit and what the deal is likely to be before going on to talk about the next steps towards independence.
It's something that keeps being pushed back, so in turn that keeps pushing this back as well.
Well, that's right, but Nicola had said from the start that we must know what the deal is first. People in Scotland must know what the deal is first. It's probably not going to change anybody who's already committed to independence, whatever the outcome of Brexit, but there are other people who want to know what that's going to mean for them. And I'm surprised by the number of people that have come forward to me, we're out campaigning fairly regularly, both on independence and in terms of party politics, who are saying that they've just had enough of the Brexit nonsense and they're looking for the opportunity to move towards independence.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to come along today. I'll not give you the full poem of the 27 MSPs, female MSPs. I think there was one line in it was about Emma Harper and sheep worrying, which is actually a big issue in the Scottish Parliament. I managed to work that into the poem, but I just said that I thought that Burns was okay. I thought I could do a bit better, and I was in a majority of one at the end of the night. I think I still prefer Burns. Thanks very much, as I say, for letting me come along. I should maybe just say, because everyone here is obviously bound together by their commitment towards independence, and I think just a couple of bits of background about me. When I was 16, 17, not really interested in politics at school, I'd have to say, although I do remember, for those that can remember back then, 79 there was a referendum. It was on devolution. And I remember asking my mum, she couldn't go to the polling station, she was unwell that day, if I could take her polling card, and she said, no, you can't do that, it's illegal. So there must have been some kind of interest I had at that point, and then I went off to join the Marines for 3 years, and when I came back from the Marines, I then joined the campaign for the Scottish Assembly, which is an all-party group. In fact, the person that ran it in my area was Jim Boyack, who was Sarah Boyack's father. Sarah Boyack was a Labour minister and MSP. And then in 1984, in the fantastic yes city of Dundee, I went to university and joined the SNP at Freshers' Fair. And it's worth saying that the SNP then and now has two commitments that you make when you join it. The first is to, of course, achieve self-determination for Scotland. Now, that's not the same as independence. I support independence, always have, but it's the right for Scotland to choose. Very important to bear that in mind. And the second thing was to further the interests of the people of Scotland. So I feel I've tried to do that over the years as a councillor, council leader, MSP, government minister and so on. Very important thing to do that. And we all do that. We all want to contribute to further the interests of the people of Scotland. But in all that time, I've now been in the party 35 years, been committed to independence for that long and longer. I would consider everything that I've done to be secondary to achieving independence for Scotland, because that makes so much else possible. And I think we're coming to a really exciting time. It's good to see so many young people here. I was just saying to somebody yesterday that my two sons got involved in the last referendum in 2014. One was still too young to vote and one was just old enough. It was his first vote. And I was thinking, for 30 years I've been trying to get a vote in Scottish independence, and he comes along and his first ever vote is the voter independence referendum. And interestingly, both they and most of their pals when the referendum campaign started back in 2012 were against. I don't know if you remember that, but it was amongst young people, there was quite a strong feeling of against. And during the course of the campaign, they totally turned around, and both my sons got quite involved in the campaign. In fact, the older one came along to the count that night. Unfortunately for me, Clackmannanshire is the one that tends to report first, and that gave us a pretty clear indication of how things were going to go. We were 46% yes, 54% no. And all of a sudden just burst into tears at that point. He put a lot of effort and invested a lot of hope into, and he wasn't the only one either. So it's really good to see as many young people, and they will be crucial to our success going forward. It is a really exciting time, very troubling time for a lot of people because of Brexit and the announcement, I know you've heard about it today from Theresa May. It's now going to be the 12th of March before she allows a meaningful vote. Interestingly, there's already quite a strong reaction to that. The CBI, who really should have been saying a lot more than they have done by this stage, are absolutely livid and say they've lost all faith in the Westminster process. A stage that we reached some time ago, I think. And it's interesting to see what the fallout from that announcement will be if there is the case that a spine runs along the cabinet table and finds someone to belong to, and they actually do stand up to Theresa May and say this is just not good. And this idea of no deal be on the table because it's a good bargaining chip, it's a bit like putting a gun to your head and saying, give me what you want or I'll shoot myself. Because no deal is an absolute disaster. It's a disaster for Scotland, it's a disaster for the UK. So we're coming to the crucial part. I wrote an article recently and it said, the first line was, we're coming to the end game of Brexit. And the next part of the sentence said, we could have written that at any time in the last 6 months. It's just gone on and on and on. But I do mention it because whenever I do these meetings, and this week I started off in East Lothian, I was in Cathcart, I was in Cumnock, Sauchie yesterday, we've got a by-election there. I get asked about when the next referendum is going to be, and I had long discussions with Nicola about this subject. But I do think we're coming to that kind of crucial stage of the very end of the Brexit process. Now that's not guaranteed. I think there's still a chance. What we'll get is an announcement on Tuesday or the week afterwards. We're going to extend Article 50 and the whole thing continues on. The disinvestment that's happening just now. Unemployment is very low in Scotland, historically low. Still a lot of underemployment going on, but there's, in terms of unemployment, it's low. But the lack of investment now and the quality of jobs that we're losing. I did a thing at our party conference a couple of years ago with a guy from the Investment Association. That's the big banks and the fund managers, and they said jobs are going now. It might not be people getting sacked or losing their job here, but they're going elsewhere just now. The Dutch government said a couple of weeks ago over 250 UK firms had been talking to them about moving across. And many companies you'll see over the next few weeks and months will leave. They'll set up operations elsewhere. Now, you won't hear about it, one, because in some cases it's been said the UK government's getting them to sign non-disclosure agreements. And in the other cases, they're not going to say to their customer base here in Scotland or the UK, we're leaving. They will just go, they'll continue to want the business here. So I think it's coming to a really crucial stage. And we can't have another 9 months, another year going on like this if Article 50 is extended. So I think it's coming to a really crucial stage. But I also do believe, and I am absolutely convinced that Nicola Sturgeon is right to say that we have to let people see what the deal is before we move on to the next stage. And she's said that since the very start. And she would have made that statement about the next steps by now if they had done what they said they were going to do, which was to have a deal by last October. I don't know if you remember they said we've got to go around 27 other countries and get the approval of them when we give them the deal. So it had to be done by October. We're now almost in March and it's still not done. So Nicola has been absolutely consistent with what she said. But the main thing I wanted to talk about today, and it's been picked up by a couple of the people I've just heard just now, absolutely right, is about the way that we conduct ourselves. And it's great, by the way, to see a packed hall on a Sunday here in the North East with people all committed to independence. That in itself is a transformation. When I went to Dundee University in October, a long time ago, we went out for we had a campaign in Broughty Ferry. We had a local by-election, and you'd be lucky if every 10th or 15th door you get somebody to say they supported or even talk about independence, far less support the SNP. And actually the SNP were about 11% in the polls, independence was about the same. And at that time, if, like me as a student in politics, you thought about politics, if you wanted a career in politics, you didn't join the SNP. That was career death. You joined the Labour Party. That was where you got a career. So it was never really about careers. But that was the difference now, seeing people like this here, or even achieving 45% in the last referendum. As I said, I went to my own local county. I had two. I represent Clackmannanshire Council area and a bit of Stirling, so I went to both counts. And then HQ had asked me to go off to, because they knew they'd be first, to the media, to do media right through the night. So I had the joy of watching the results come in and sitting next to people like Ian Murray and John Reid and people like that. And at the very end, 8 o'clock in the morning, Bill Robertson on GMS asked me, he said, you must be absolutely gutted by this. And apart from the fact I said, and this one must be on record somewhere, I never agreed with the idea it's once in a generation. You can't tell a country when they can decide they're going to vote on independence. Apart from that, I said, and I meant it, I did not feel bad. I remembered the 11% that we had, and I thought 45%, I thought it was a stunning achievement. Of course, I was disappointed it wasn't that bit more, and we managed to achieve our independence. And look at the situation Scotland would be in now, we'll be independent. Look what's happened to Ireland and Dublin since the UK voted for independence. A number of companies that want to be in an English-speaking country within the EU. Think of the jobs bonanza, and Ireland struggles. Dublin's got major infrastructure problems with that. Think of the bonanza that we'd be in just now, apart from being independent and take our own decisions. So there's been a huge transformation, but the point that was made earlier on is that we're all pretty convinced. There's a bunch of folk on the other side that are pretty convinced that will not be convinced otherwise, if we're honest. I'm not going to convince Richard Leonard or Ruth Davidson to vote for independence, but there's a group in between. And the point about how we approach this is really important. It's the opposite of what's happened in Brexit. In Brexit, you've had, if you look at the defections from the two parties, both of them are citing an absolutely poisonous atmosphere in their parties. I think it's worse from what I hear in the Labour Party, really vicious, nasty stuff, much of which doesn't make it into the media. And of course the splits from Brexit. You've got one guy resigned, Ian Austin, he's definitely for Brexit, others are for a people's vote. And the Tory party, Anna Soubry's talking about the entryism and the poisonous nature of some of the social media against anybody in the Tory party that says anything other than they're dead keen on a hard Brexit. We can't have that kind of referendum. We can't have that kind of debate, and we didn't have that, despite those that tried to rewrite the history and say it was a poisonous, divisive thing. It was not. We have to be the ones that, if you like, turn the other cheek. Because if you're going to go and talk to somebody that voted no, and we have to have people that voted no last time vote yes next time, if you're going to convince them, you're not going to convince them by saying, you were wrong. We can use a pound if we want to, we're not going to use a pound, but you were wrong about the pound, you were wrong about pensions. So much for your AAA status for your pound, that went years ago now. You can't convince somebody by pointing out what you think are the faults in their thinking. You have to try and find some common ground. And it's also true for those that are a bit worried, and I was just having a conversation a few minutes ago about the idea of a constitution for Scotland and how that could be reassuring to people, because there are still some people, quite a lot of people, that believe if they vote for independence and Scotland becomes independent, that they've got an SNP government forevermore. That people believe that, and we have to get underneath that idea. But the other point is, if they think there's going to be, some people might think it will be an SNP government, some people might think it's going to be a one-party state, it's going to be something that they can't change once they've made that big change, and we have to convince them otherwise. So the way that we actually discuss and conduct ourselves during this referendum and this campaign should be an example of the kind of Scotland that we want to see. And that is about being inclusive, it's about engaging with people, it means being patient, it means being kind to people as well. People are genuinely very worried about Brexit, and we're asking them to consider potentially another big change. So you have to take people with you, and I think that is the way that we do it, by listening to people. I said before that I got elected in a by-election in 1996 as a councillor. I won it by 4 votes. 598 for Labour, 602 for me. So I knew in that area that a number of people loathed me, loathed the SNP, loathed the idea of independence. Now that's now 23 years I've been representing the people of Alva, and as a councillor and MSP. I know people that came to see me that were diametrically opposed to my views, but once you've listened to them, and it really does mean listening, I mean actually hearing what somebody said, and tried to do that in our SNP National Assemblies by making sure whatever was said was recorded and people got feedback on it. If you actually listen to people, even when you can't do something for them, they feel they've been listened to, they feel valued by it. And that is the way that we can win independence, by making sure people have that sense that they're being listened to. And if they think they've been listened to now as part of the campaign, then they will think that if those involved in trying to convince them towards yes are in independent Scotland, that's the way an independent Scotland will be. They'll be valued and listened to. And we are working on very productive ground just now. We have to admit the fact that many people in 2014 did have a real faith in the UK establishment and the UK government. They felt it was a strong government, it was stable, more strong and stable. But they did. They felt it was a player on the international stage, and they had this, for various reasons, they had an affinity with the UK state. And that has been completely shattered for many people. It's not a pleasant experience for them. They don't like the fact, they don't like to see Westminster, a government getting the biggest defeat they ever had, or losing their votes on contempt of Parliament. Or today, 3 cabinet ministers with an article in the Sunday Mail, the Mail on Sunday, which criticises, undermines the government they're meant to be in and the Prime Minister they're meant to be working with. So this has really shaken people's faith, as have, of course, things like Honda, Nissan, many other things. They feel the ground shifting under their feet. And we have to be, I think, that voice of reason and reassurance. Now, not everyone here will be in the SNP. I am, and I think the contrast between the way that Nicola Sturgeon's government's conducted themselves and the UK government is huge. And even to the extent of having taken other parties in the Scottish Parliament with us, I think is really quite reassuring. That's the way that we could take things forward on if we achieve independence, by having that consensual approach. So I really think we have to think, especially on social media. And I see Gillian's here, and I have to admit, sometimes I'm not as good as I'm asking other people here to be about not engaging with some of our opponents in a kind of negative way. I suppose when I do it in the chamber, and I'm sure when Gillian does it, if she ever does it, but she's very well behaved in the chamber, it's because you're talking to people you know you're not going to convince. I'll give you one example of my bad behaviour. I'm very struck by the Tory group that we have now. It's quite a right-wing Tory group in the Scottish Parliament, much more so than previously. And I reminded them that in the 1980s there was a TV programme called The New Statesman, the main character in which was a guy called Alan Bastard. And I said, that was one guy that was, like the right-wing Tories in the 1980s. We used to get that in the Tory party. I said, but now you've got a whole bunch of Bastards. I wasn't disciplined by the presiding officer for saying it. I said it again. And it's a very different kind. And they, of course, will have this totally negative campaign going forward. But you do have to very much resist the temptation to waste energy on people that are not going to be convinced by your arguments in the first place. And the worst place is social media. It's been great to see some of the presentations I've seen in terms of I call it new media. I suppose young people just call it media, but the new media that's here, and also some of the things that have been said that work in communities, making the arguments for independence relevant, and also making them relevant to local areas. That's why I think AIM is such a really important thing. The 2 areas that struck me when I was standing in deputy leadership more than any other, about feeling a wee bit out of the campaigns for the SNP that they run, were the North East and the South West of Scotland. And the South West also has big challenges. Lots of people from England live there. Many work over the border in England. They have a very rural area as well. So it's absolutely right to say that the people that can make it most relevant, the arguments for independence, are people that live locally and know all the issues which are important in that area. It's actually a subset of the main argument, the best argument there is for independence, that we can make better decisions when we take decisions for ourselves. And the same is true in smaller areas around the country. So I think it's extremely positive. Over the 35 years or so I've been involved in campaigning for independence, I find this a really exciting time. I got very excited towards the end of the last referendum. The last day we had a big push in a place called Tullibery, again an area with lots of deprivation in Clackmannanshire. And I know it's an area where many people have not only not voted recently, they haven't voted for decades, some people there. And we managed through that campaign, for those that were involved, if you remember, to sign up people to make sure they're registered to vote. And we got a huge turnout. And that last day we went up this street in Tullibery, really deprived area, and there was yes banners everywhere, there was kids taking all the merchandise that we had. And there was somebody came up to me, this woman said, if we do this, and she felt she was really giving something by saying she was willing to go and vote, because she hadn't voted before, and of course there's a fear going back to the times of the poll tax about registering to vote. If we do this, can we win this? And I said, and I must admit, it was the time that I felt most like we were going to win it. And I said, yes, we can win it. And for some people to talk about the vote that they had subsequently on Brexit, because there was a bit of a correlation between some places that voted yes and some places that voted for Brexit, my view, and it's only my view, is that the same thing motivated them. They felt marginalised and cut out of society, that it wasn't relevant to them, and the independence referendum convinced a lot of people it was relevant to them. And also for Brexit, it was a way to change the whole system as far as they saw it, to shake it up, to try and make it work for them. So we do have to have the arguments about Europe as we go forward as well. So I just think it's a really exciting time. It goes back to that last couple of days of the last referendum. Things are going to happen very quickly, I think, over the next few weeks. The one other thing I would say, and I'll finish on this, is within the Yes movement, it's not necessary. Now I've met with as many different parts of the Yes movement as I can. National Yes Registry represents about 140 Yes groups around the country. They're organised autonomously. They don't have a central structure. The Scottish Independence Convention, the Scottish Independence Foundation, some of whom are here today, with the SSP, with the Greens, different activists. What we have to bear in mind is, as we move towards independence, the Yes movement is not the same now as it was before the last referendum. It's settled. There are people that now have a real niche, a real role, and they want to pursue things in that way. So we can't have where the SNP, perhaps of necessity, had to direct things very much in terms of getting the campaign off the ground. It's a different campaign this time. But, and it's quite right, we have different views of what independence might mean. There's a perfectly legitimate view of what a Tory independent Scotland would look like. We might not, many people not share it, but we should not be stopping somebody of a conservative mindset that wants to have independence in order to achieve that kind of society from voting for independence. But as we move towards independence, we're going to have to take some decisions. The SNP is going to have its policy platform, its offering for the referendum worked out. Now that might not chime with different parts of the Yes movement. But let's not, whatever else we do, let's have the debate, and I don't mind disagreeing, I've said this to different people in the movement, let's not question each other's commitment to independence. Let's not start tearing lumps out of each other. We've got enough people on the other side ready to do that to us. Let's try and maintain that unity, and the dividends of harmony, or tolerance if you like, to me are very obvious when we see what's happening down south. If you look at the Labour Party, the Tory Party down there, even the Lib Dems, they had a guy voting for Brexit. So the benefits of staying united on the front of independence itself are absolutely huge. People take a look at movements and parties and see if they are united, speaking with one voice, at least on the issue of independence itself. So let's have, let 1,000 flowers bloom, and let's have people giving their vision of what an independent Scotland will be. But don't challenge somebody else who's got a different vision of an independent Scotland and say you're not sufficiently committed, or I don't agree with that, and start ripping into people. It's not going to serve our interests, and that will mean biting our tongues to some extent. But at the end of it, if there are different and competing visions of what an independent Scotland will look like, then people that vote for it can pick which one they want to do, and they'll get to understand the point that after having achieved independence, they'll get to choose which kind of Scotland they want to have. That's the important point. I don't want to have general election for the first general election of an independent Scotland until we're independent. If you see what I mean, we can't be having that kind of, if you like, competition. So that's my central point. The way that we conduct ourselves is really important. This is a really exciting time. We are going to have to take some decisions on what the offering is to the Scottish people, and I'm not one of these people. I just see there's a copy of it here, Scotland's Future, the white paper. I'm not one of these that looks back and says that was terrible. I don't think so at all. I think it was a fantastic attempt to try and put in a much more formalised way and a much more thoughtful way what our offering was for independence than Brexit ever achieved. I mean, that's, you know, 600 odd pages, I think it was. They had the back of a bus or the side of a bus. So I think we had something very important, but we have to update that. Big issues, currency, defence, pensions. We have to get our voice much more measured in terms of that. It's a really exciting time, and I think it's fantastic to have as many people here. I've been told by Alan we have to have a photograph for a few minutes just to let you know that's going to happen. But in the meantime, thank you very much for listening to me. For those that have got any stamina left after a long day, if there's any questions that anybody has, I'm happy to try and answer any questions. I'm really chuffed when I went to the Cumnock to bun supper, because I knew that's the one place I could go to and not be asked that question. I was in the close to the lasses, but inevitably I was asked it afterwards. It's going to be as soon as we know, I think, when, at least from Nicola, when the state of the deal on Brexit is known. She said that from the very start, and I think she's right to say that. But that could be very, very soon, as you know. Gentlemen here?
You drove on the AWPR yet? The one that's finished?
Well, I've driven on it twice. I drove on it today, even though it was the wrong way to go, but I've not done the last bit yet, which I'm really looking forward to, because the number of times I was up with welly boots looking at this road. But just bear in mind, and I've banged the drum for the SNP just now, 70 odd years, other parties talking about it. And it was the SNP government.
Should have been built 40 years ago, I get told all the time. Should have been built 40 years ago.
So it should. The SNP government.
Who was in charge 40 years ago?
That's true. The lady here.
Hi.
You, yeah.
If Article 50 is extended, are all the parties ready and prepared to field candidates in the general elections?
To be perfectly honest, I couldn't care less if the other parties are ready. But for the SNP, it's a very good question. We have taken steps. So I think this week there are people being vetted as potential candidates. And I think even if it's a fairly short extension from Article 50, if I'm right, there have to be UK candidates for the European election. So we're not going to get caught out with that. We are getting ready for it. And this gentleman here, now come to yourself. Because he bought me a coffee earlier on. So.
No feel about me.
Well done.
I'm sure the answer to the question is yes, but reassure us. Is the currency issue being sorted? That's what they got us with the last time.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people feel that, and I felt that myself, but there's been very little analysis done of what people were thinking when they were voting last time. But such analysis as has been done has shown it was not a big issue for most people, although it was a huge issue in the campaign. Now, I can only talk for my party, but the SNP had 3 national assemblies when the findings of the Growth Commission were discussed, and it was discussed in a way that you've done today, with people leading the conversations, not somebody at a top table telling what they're going to discuss. And currency was the biggest issue, people wanted to move more quickly towards Scottish currency. Other folks said you have to have that stability before you go into it. But the one thing that came back, and it wasn't an issue so much, more than the currency, was people wanted to have a message they could sell on a doorstep, whatever it was. Whatever the position was in currency, they wanted to be able to say, this is what we're going to say. So I can say the SNP will soon come to its position in terms of currency. And for those that were involved in the Growth Commission, the points that were made there will be taken into account. And the way the SNP will do it, we'll have a discussion at a conference, so the members will decide if they want to amend that or change that. Other parts of the Yes movement will come to their own conclusions as well. But the importance, even if it's a case that somebody said to me, have you seen the film The Outlaw King? at the Battle of Loudon Hill, and they're all getting ready to battle, and they're all got the huge English army coming up to them. You don't really see anybody turn around and say, what kind of currency are we going to use? So it will be an issue that will be used, so we have to be ready for it, even though there might be different points of view about it. And it's the lady just in there.
Thanks. Shortly after you started speaking, and I was listening, but The Guardian posted an article to say that EU sources are saying it could be 2021 that Brexit is delayed until. How concerned are you that we miss the tipping point? Because there's a lot of exasperation out there on social media, but you know, when you're talking to people, oh, we need to call a date now, we need to call a date now. I don't know that people's patience might last. I think that's incredibly sensitive timing.
It's a very good point, and I think if you were to be in the shoes of the person that's going to have to start the whole process, the difficulty in making that decision, just for the reason that you're kind of outlining, because if you go at the wrong time, you don't get the right answer, the consequences of that are horrendous. So, and I think those, and she is making that decision, fully understand that. Well, one thing I would say is, I think the extension of Article 50, if that happens, just means we're going to get more and more of disinvestment and job losses and the undermining of the economy. And the other thing that's worth bearing in mind is 2021, if Brexit was to happen, and we didn't go relatively soon, then the idea that Brexit might become normalised is quite a worry. People get used to it and that's the new normal. So that, I think, I know is also in Nicola's mind. One of the things that's very important is what happens on a Section 30 order. So now, I have said, and I think Gillian may have been at the group meeting when I've said it, I don't think that certainly the SNP and I don't think the Yes Movement should be willing to anticipate a refusal of a Section 30 order as a reason not to call a referendum. If we want to have a referendum, then we decide we're going to have a referendum. But there is a worry, I know that Nicola's concerned with the fact that the arguments over a Section 30 can start to dissipate the support for independence, so that's a worry as well. So there's all these kind of judgments, but and the other point, of course, to make is that we have a mandate. The SNP have a mandate. They went into the election in 2016 saying that they would have a referendum, that they could have a referendum if we were taken out of Europe against their will. We've had a vote in the Scottish Parliament where Gillian and I and all our colleagues and the Greens voted for it. We also had a Westminster election when by far the biggest number of MPs were SNP MPs supporting independence. And you could also argue that we've said that a material change in circumstances could force another election. Now you could say that as Europe. I would also argue that the changes, the power grab to the Scottish Parliament is a material change in circumstances. So I think we've got every democratic justification for doing it. And I would say to the UK government, if they're thinking about trying to refuse it, I think the biggest thing that's happened to shift people is now the way that Scotland's being treated. Now we might all feel that, but I think, if you think about the walkout of Westminster, it's very hard to get a constitutional issue right into the public mind so they become very angry about it. And that, we had 7,000 people join the SNP after that. We had a demonstration outside the Scottish Parliament and I went out to talk to them. I was just elected as the SNP Depute Leader, and there's people there that had never been involved in a political party. If you think about Mundell saying, yes, you can get to amend it, you'll make sure you listen to all your amendments, and they rejected every one. It's okay, it will go to the Lords and we'll go through all your amendments, they didn't do that. It's okay, it's coming back to the Commons, we'll give you every chance to debate it. They cut it down to 18 minutes, and the Government Minister talked it out. The contempt, and even going back to that morning of 2014, David Cameron walking out and saying the big priority was English votes for English laws. So I think the contempt that's been shown towards Scotland, it doesn't matter for us, because we all know what we think. But for those people that might not have been convinced, they see the democratic deficit is extraordinary. I was on radio this week with Adam Tompkins, and he was going on about, you know, how great Westminster was, and I said, there are, you know, and they go on how undemocratic the EU is. Well, Westminster, the legislature in this country, has more people that are unelected in it than elected. The House of Lords has more members than the House of Commons, and the House of Lords is part of Parliament. It's the Parliament, the Crown and Parliament is actually one people. So I think that democratic deficit is really important. It's worth bearing in mind as we're campaigning. You are disenfranchised by the UK if you live in Scotland, and we should get that point across as well. There's a gentleman there, and I'll come to the gentleman.
If there is a significant delay to the to Brexit itself, if the Article 50 is put on the back burner for some significant period of time. Do you have a view on what the EU's view would be on continuing enforcement of EU directives, and particularly the EU directive on tax avoidance?
Well, it's often said, and it is true, that the EU does have an incredible ability to compromise and be pragmatic about these things. But I think if they were to see, first of all, there's a question of whether they'll agree to an extension of Article 50, and I think it was to be a short one without any particular purpose, just to give them more time to keep on avoiding meaningful votes, whatever it is, then I'm not sure the EU would go along with that. Yeah. And there is a danger if it goes on so long, the damage becomes even worse. So, but if they did that, I think they would take a pretty dim view of any deviation from what they call the acquis community, the body of law that the EU has. So one country, the UK, was trying to undermine it by getting an advantageous position in relation to tax avoidance for whatever reason. I can't see them having much patience for that. I don't know how it would play out, but it's almost like trying to get advantages, as they would see it, of being out with the EU before they're out the EU. And there's no provision for that within the EU. If you want an exemption to something, like the Danish had over second homes, and the Maastricht Treaty, you've got to get it in a treaty, and they won't have that. So I don't think the EU would stand for the UK taking a different approach. And if that was the question answered.
That's the question answered, thank you.
Here?
Yeah. The UK is one of only 3 countries in the world which doesn't have a written constitution. And a written constitution is out with, it is the apex of the law, superior to actually a parliament. You mentioned earlier that you want a public debate. When are we going to start that public debate? Because a constitution is not going to be written overnight. Even if we actually used the draft constitutions which are on the table today. And there's a couple of representatives of the 2 different kinds in this room. It takes years to actually work that out. When are we going to start that public debate? Let's bear in mind that under Scottish constitutional principles, it is the people who are the supreme authority, not Parliament. And if we go into an independent status without a written constitution, there is no guarantee that we'll get one. The example for that is Iceland.
Yeah, of course, what happened in Iceland was they just got together. The whole population was involved in the process of arriving.
We've got social media.
We have. First of all, it's not up to me to decide when a public debate happens. There's nothing to prevent a public debate. There are quite a number of people, Elliot Bulmer, John Drummond and others, that have taken forward the issue of the Constitution, and I had a chat with somebody earlier on. I think the important point that you're raising is, going back to my point about people might be worried about what an independent Scotland would mean in terms of pluralism of parties and basic rights. Promoting a constitution may be one way of helping to alleviate those concerns. So I have no problem with that. I'm going to meet with John Drummond to discuss it further. But there's nothing to stop anybody, certainly not the wider yes movement or the public, from discussing a constitution. I would tended to have think, and I think wrongly in the past, that the constitution was something that was too dry, it was hard to get people animated about it, but I do think, because of what I've just said, and the arguments you made to me, it is a way of alleviating people's concerns about their rights. As you say, it's like a basic law, it's superior to whatever a parliament can do, and also the courts have to have regard to that as well. So it might be a way to provide reassurance to people about their rights in independent Scotland. So I'm happy to be involved in that public debate, and there's no reason why anybody else can't be.
It would be one of the best tools the nation could actually encompass if we actually had that public debate on that. But it's not something which individual groups can do on their own, because it's not a cheap operation.
So the gentleman just there.
Yep, we know that from the European referendum, the social media was a great use in identifying voters no one had actually found before. It was done in illegal and unethical ways perhaps, but nonetheless it was very effective. Are we up to speed with the techniques of identifying potential supporters through social media, but in a legal and ethical way?
I think we're getting there. So first of all, and I have to try and distinguish between the SNP and the wider Yes movement. As part of the exercise of talking to different Yes groups, I've talked to 2 people that have developed apps for specifically an independence referendum. One was, it wasn't quite finished, but it was very interesting. It gave you all the information that you needed. It was real time, and also allowed you, if whoever it was canvassing or talking to somebody who couldn't answer a question, say in defence of pensions, you an immediate call into a call centre such that the person then got a call afterwards. So people are working on this just now. For the SNP and all the other political parties, there's an investigation just now by the Information Commissioner on the information that you gain and hold about people. So that's kind of making people think about what they're doing just now. It's a bit of a transition period. The Information Commissioner, very nice lady from Canada, has the view that political parties shouldn't be allowed to hold information on people. I don't think that's what's going to happen in the end. What happened in 2003 when the last data protection was, they put in at the last minute a wee change to the law which meant that political parties were allowed, on the same basis that criminal authorities were allowed, to keep information about people. And I think if the Commissioner went back and said we don't want to have political parties keeping information, I think the political parties would say we'll change the law to make sure that they can. But we're in a bit of a... Generally on social media laws, a related point, the SNP had a guy in 2010-11 called Kirk Torrance that transformed the way the SNP was able to use social media, and the SNP stole a march from the other parties. The other parties are by and large caught up. But it is still the case, given that we, how can I put this, we don't have a huge amount of support in the mainstream media, that social media is hugely important. And it's hugely important if it's used in the right way, and go back to the point of being courteous to people and not engaging or wasting time on somebody that's looking to just make you bite and have a go at them. So social media is very important. A lot of work's going on that. The SNP has got an incredible reach with its social media now. Bernie Sanders actually had his list, if you like, of contacts was bigger than the Democratic parties. They've been trying to get it off him for years. So, but we're not the only ones doing this. I've read about dark money and Cambridge Analytica, that kind of stuff. Other people are looking at other stuff, and that goes on the other side of what's ethical. We have to be ethical, but we have to be on top of it, yeah. I think we've got time for one last question. I think we've said yes. I know who that is.
Okay. I think probably for all of us, this period of waiting is different for you in government, for us down in the grassroots level. We're sort of constantly told we must work away, we must prepare. And I think it's probably true of every person in this group. They're involved in some sort of group where we're doing that. But for me, the thing that I find difficult is that we're working, it seems to me, in a piecemeal fashion. We haven't got a focus or a framework, and I think that has to come from people like you, from Nicola, from the government. I don't want to as I say, a framework, yes, that I felt that what I was doing was pouring in to something that was focused on something, that what somebody here was doing and the people at that table were doing were all in fact gathering together and moving forward. What do you think, for example, you can do within the constraints you have to give us that sort of feeling of movement?
Well, I think the biggest thing, and I think we'd all acknowledge, as soon as you get somebody saying it's on, then you start to have a whole different atmosphere. I think the atmosphere is changing a bit just now. And just to be careful, I'll speak on behalf of the SNP here. So I don't think we'd had the relationship with the wider Yes movement that we should have had over a number of years. And I've tried to work hard talking to different parts of the Yes movement so we can feel that we're part of a common endeavour. And also for the SNP, what I've done is I've called days of action which are specifically on independence. And just as this actual gathering here demonstrates, don't wait for the Centre to tell you. Go out and do what you think is important in your communities. I do think it's important, and Nicola has said this before, that we try and work in the meantime to get it above 50% in the polls. Apart from anything else, when we have the discussion about Section 30 with Westminster, if you can point to majority support in the polls, it strengthens your argument. And there's nothing to stop us now campaigning for independence. And I don't just mean actually on days of actions. We've got one in the SNP every second Saturday of the month now. But I'm talking about just conversations that you have with people, starting to raise it. I've been surprised, I wouldn't say it's a flood of people, but I've seen a pattern of people saying to me when I'm out campaigning, and I know they're not previous Yes supporters, and maybe not even SNP supporters, but they're saying, are you going to get on with this referendum? And the last thing I would say is, I know what you're saying, Rob, but I think no matter how much those of us that have been committed to this for a very long time feel more and more impatient, we want it now, it's not us that will alone decide this. We have to have that group that's in the middle, and they don't feel that way just now. They feel very worried about Brexit. And I do think we have to make sure we do it at the time when we can get, and it may be coming very soon, when we can get everybody saying this is the right time to take that decision. And I mean, as a senior academic in my constituency, he was no last time, absolute no, and I had a number of discussions with him. He's absolutely yes, because his university is losing students. You can't get staff to come from the EU now, and the nature of the university is changing because of that lack of richness. So other people are coming to their conclusion. We have been there for a long time, I understand that, and I understand the impatience. But the point that you make about trying to come together, all I can say is I'll continue to try and work with the rest of the Yes movement to see if we can get a common endeavour that we can all get behind.
Can I just say though, in response to the lady up the back, Angus, is it not Angus Robertson? He's brought that focus in some respects, as have other organisations. What's he called it?
Progress Scotland.
Progress Scotland. You know, like, and it's already got masses of support. You know, and it's about donations, etc. as well. And that's a way of focusing, you know, people's energy. You know, all the groups. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm so tired now. You know, but people like him are doing that already.
Well, that's right, in Progress Scotland, there's a particular purpose that Angus has set up, and I had a big chat with Angus a few months ago where he was talking about this. The real benefit of that, apart from the stuff on the website you'll see with people that have come from no to yes, including the one that was done yesterday with the young Liberal Democrat voter that's now a supporter, apart from those things, is the work that they can do with the backing they're going to get for polling and research, which the SNP and other political parties would find it hard to sustain and to finance, but that's the real value, I think, of what Angus can do. And you can see things starting to come together, I hope, now that you start to see things come together towards what was meant to be the Brexit decision point. So, one last thing I say, and I say it to the SNP as well, don't wait for the centre to tell you what to do. And we do have to have a framework to understand that point, and I think we'll be working on that. You should be hearing about that very shortly, but don't wait for permission, just get on and campaign.